Alright, hello. Today we're just going to be quickly going over the human gait. So just understanding the gait cycle in a biomechanical sense. The slides are taken directly from Dr. Krishnan from Cal State University Long Beach Physical Therapy Program, the Doctor of Physical Therapy Program, the one I'm in. So no plagiarism, all credit goes to her. And then this is just my own notes that I kind of summarized based on these. Just my way of studying. This is going to be me quickly going over understanding the foundations of the gait cycle before we move on to ground reaction forces and further just understanding the gait cycle as a whole. The gait cycle is going to be a cyclic series of movements, and that's basically just what walking is. The gait cycle itself is going to be a stride, so they are interchangeable, kind of. Stride is a gait cycle, and a gait cycle is determined by the successive heel contact to the next heel contact of the same foot. So it is going to be heel contact with my right. There's a heel contact on my left, and then the next heel contact on my right again will be one gait cycle. And it's important to know this because a successive heel contact from your right foot to the same heel contact of your right foot is a stride, which is a gait cycle. However, a step is heel contact of one foot, aka your right foot, to the heel contact of the opposite foot. That's just basically a step. Understanding that is basically one gait cycle is one stride, used interchangeably, and one stride equals two steps. Going down, we're going to be looking at the temporal parameters, spatial parameters, and just combining them. So the temporal parameters are basically talking about time. So we have our cadence, which is measured in steps per minute. So it's basically your step rate. The average step rate is around 110 steps per minute. We talk about stride time, which is the time for one full gait cycle, because a stride is a gait cycle. We have step time, which is the time for a right or left step completion. So heel contact of your ipsilateral foot to the next heel contact of the contralateral foot, aka step time. In a symmetrical typical gait cycle, the step time will be the reciprocal of your cadence. Now, going to spatial parameters, we talk about stride length, which is just basically the distance between the heel contacts of the same foot. You have your step length, which is the distance between heel contacts of the opposite foot, because step and stride, kind of get the gist of it. We have step width, which is the lateral distance between heel centers. So if this is my foot and this is my foot, is going to be the distance between the middle of my heel and the middle of my other heel. And that's basically your step width. And the foot angle is going to be the angle of the line of progression, which we'll talk about later on, and the long axis of the foot. So knowing foot angle and then specifically joint angles, which we'll touch up on in a little bit. When you combine them, we talk about our spatial or temporal spatial parameters. That's just going to be our walking speed. And walking speed, so speed is velocity, which will be taken as distance over time. The average walking speed will be 1.37 meters per second. It's basically used as an objective measure for gait, and it's the product of step rate and step length, which we learned for the spatial parameters. Now, looking at this graph right here, this is the gait cycle, which are split up into two periods. You have your stance period, which is 62% of your gait cycle, and your swing period, which is 38% of your gait cycle. In the stance period, it's going to begin with the foot in contact. So it's going to begin with initial contact and end with toe off. Whereas in the swing period, the foot is not in contact with the ground because it is in swing phase, in this case a period, and it's going to be from toe off to heel contact. Now, the way I'm saying period is because each period is split up into different phases. So you have your phases of initial contact, loading, response, mild or mid stance, terminal stance, and pre-swing. And then you also have initial swing, mid swing, and terminal swing. In these phases, you also have tasks. So weight acceptance, single limb support, swing limb advancement. You also have support periods, which are your double limb support and your single limb support. So I'm going to try to line up with both my notes and the slides. In double limb support, both limbs are going to be on the ground simultaneously. It accounts for 20 to 22% of your gait cycle, and it occurs twice in your gait cycle. You have your initial double limb support and terminal double limb support. And this is going to be when both feet are in full contact with the ground. So make sure you know that, because if you zoom in here, you have your double limb supports here. And then, sorry, just got a notification on my phone there. You also have your single limb support. So in single limb support, basically kind of makes sense with the double limb support. One foot will be on the ground, whilst the other limb will be in swing, aka will not be making contact with the ground. So it accounts for 38 to 40% of the gait cycle, but you're going to times it by 2 because contralateral and ipsilateral limbs occurs twice in the gait cycle as well. So just keep that note. Now, going to the different phases, we're going to start off with initial contact. Or I guess before we start, let's talk about the different functional tasks of Gait. So we have weight acceptance. So I'll go back up here. So weight acceptance is basically going to be your initial contact and loading response. You have your single limb support, which will be occurring in mid stance and terminal stance, and your swing limb advancement, which will be basically all the swings. Now that we have that taken down, let's go by each phase one by one. So let's start with initial contact. So I'm going to leave the definition here as is. So instant the foot drops on the floor, and immediate reaction to the onset of body weight transfer. What I like to think of is just remembering all the important critical events that occur here. So in initial contact, we have this thing called a heel rocker. So your heel rocker is when your heel will act as the fulcrum to advance your body weight, and this will impact your deceleration. Talking about the kinematics, you'll expect your trunk to be erect, your pelvis should be 5% or 5 degrees forward. Sorry about that. 5 degrees forward. Your hip, aka your thigh, will be at a 20 degrees flexion. Knee will be around 0 to 5 degrees flexion, and your ankle and toes should be neutral, because this is just going to be initial contact. And we're going to be viewing the right foot for this. So everything will be in relative to the right side. Going down to loading response, we have shock absorption as the one of the main critical events, as well as forward progression and stability of the hip. So the definition of loading response is basically when the initial contact of the right foot and continues until the limb is lifted for swing. So that's just talking about the ipsilateral and contralateral limbs. However, I think of it more as what is going on for critical events. So in loading response, you will have shock absorption, which is being led by knee flexion as well as ankle plantar flexion, which is why you will see a change in the kinematics. And you'll also have forward progression and stability of your hip. So you want hip stability to remain upright, and the forward progression is so your body can continue with the gait cycle. So the kinematics, you'll still have your trunk erect, your pelvis will be 5 degrees forward, your hip or your thigh will be 20 degrees flexed, your knee will now be 15 degrees flexed, your ankle will find itself in 5 to 10 degrees plantar flexion, and your toes will find it in neutral. The shock absorption is always going to be an eccentric motion, because when you're walking down, think of it like you're stepping down a stair. When you're flexing your knee, your quads are eccentrically working. So a shock absorption will always be eccentric, essentially. Going to mid stance, this is when you will have progression over your static foot. You also have limb and trunk stability. This is also when the ankle rocker comes in. So ankle rocker is when the ankle now will act as a fulcrum, which will control your tibial advancement. So you can see here, now the ankle is working as the fulcrum instead of the heel. And this is when your body weight will be moving posterior to anterior to the ankle. The kinematics will be here. I'm not just going to keep saying it, but good to understand the kinematics of each specific one, just knowing what the difference is. We already talked about the critical events of occurring in mid stance, so good to know that. For terminal stance, we will be talking about what is occurring here for the critical events. So we have our forefoot rocker now. So we are now advancing from ankle rocker to forefoot rocker, and this is when the forefoot rocker is being controlled by dorsiflexion with your heel rise, and your body weight is advancing forward, causing a trailing limb posture. So what I mean by that is that in order to lift up your right limb, because we're talking about the right side right now, you're going to have dorsiflexion in your ankle, which is why we have an increase in dorsiflexion. And this increase in dorsiflexion will cause your heel rise. And because you're having that heel rise and you're advancing your limb movement, you're causing a trailing limb posture. So that can be seen as through these graphs or through these illustrations. And after terminal stance, we are now going into the pre-swing. Remember, we're still talking about the right limb. So in pre-swing, now it's going to begin with the initial contact of the contralateral limb. Contralateral, aka left in this case, and it will end with the ipsilateral toe off, aka the right toe off. So you might ask, why are we in pre-swing? Pre-swing will then further accelerate our progression of our gait cycle. You'll have passive knee flexion as well as antar-plantar flexion. You'll have a net plantar flexion going up, because this is just basically preparing your ipsilateral limb, aka your right limb, to have foot clearance for the next phase. Spoiler alert. But yes, the critical events in pre-swing will be your 40 degrees passive knee flexion and your ankle plantar flexion. That's basically much for it. The ankle will be plantar flexing. Like I said, you had that net plantar flexion because in the one beforehand we had 10 degrees dorsiflexion and we have 15 degrees plantar flexion now. So you actually have a 25-degree net plantar flexion since you're going from dorsiflexion into plantar flexion. So it's being led through that ankle plantar flexion as well as passive knee flexion. For the initial swing, this is when we have foot clearance. So you want foot clearance because you don't want to drag that foot when you're walking or when you're training ambulation or gait. So when you have your foot clearance, it's very important to know that the foot clearance is occurring because of 60-degree knee flexion. That's the most important part of this phase. 60-degree knee flexion, this is the most knee flexion you'll ever see in your gait cycle. We'll also have limb advancement through the 15 degrees of hip flexion, aka thigh, on these notes. But the most important part is to understand the 6 degrees of knee flexion, which will lead to that foot clearance. Going to mid-swing, we still have that foot clearance. However, instead of the 60 degrees knee flexion, we're now into the mid-swing section where you'll have dorsiflexors activating. Now, notice how I said dorsiflexors, because our ankle will not be in dorsiflexion. Our ankle will be going from plantar flexion all the way back to neutral. However, in order to get from plantar flexion to neutral, our dorsiflexors have to activate. So, to summarize, dorsiflexors are activating for your ankle to dorsiflex back to neutral. However, the common degrees you will find your ankle in is neutral rather than in a excess of dorsiflexion. However, this is still needed in order to further foot clearance, or to further see foot clearance. And the last one we have is terminal swing. So in terminal swing, your knee flexion that we had is actually going back to neutral. So you'll see that it's 0 to 5 degrees knee flexion, but like similar to the ankle, since the last phase had 25 degrees flexion, and now this new phase had, or not 25 degrees, sorry, had, 25 degrees knee flexion, and the terminal swing only has around 0 to 5, we're technically extending our knee even though we're ending with knee flexion, if that makes sense. So we are performing the extension even though our final outcome will still be in a knee flexed position, and this will help advance our foot forward for limb progression. And that will be the end of our gait cycle before we go back to initial contact. I'm going to leave this here, Andy. If you come back and watch this, this is going to be what we should be memorizing, because this is basically the joint angles for everything we talked about in the different phases. Just another overview of that. And we didn't really didn't really go over this as much, but just one last thing I would want to talk about, understanding the rockers of Gait. So we talked about the heel, ankle, forefoot, and toe rocker. So in heel rocker, we have our loading response. This is when the heel acts as the fulcrum, and the foot will roll through a short arc of plantar flexion. In the ankle rocker, we have mid stance around that time. The tibia will be advancing forward, and this is when we have the tibial advancement as well as shock absorption because of that eccentric. In forefoot rocker, aka terminal stance, it will be now the forefoot, aka the metatarsals, acting as the fulcrum, and this is when we have that heel rising. And the last one we have is toe rocker. So we're still on the metatarsals, but now we have it in our pre-swing phase, and this is when that plantar flexion is going to thrust our tibia forward. And that's basically it. Just more information on propulsive forces and shock absorption during the actual gait cycle. And for kinematic strategies on optimizing energy expenditure during gait. So in order to limit our center of mass having a downward displacement, upward displacement, and side-to-side displacement, we have specific events that occur during these gait cycles. And in this class, at least, just memorizing it for now before I go on later for this class, like later on in depth, just understanding that to limit downward displacement of center of mass, we'll have a horizontal plane pelvic rotation, which will add height. We'll have a sagittal plane ankle rotation to add height. However, to limit upward displacement, we'll have a stance face of knee flexion to reduce our height, and a frontal plane pelvic rotation to reduce our height as well. There's also the side-to-side one that I will just leave here, so I'm not just reading word for word. And that's basically everything that I have for Gait. It's only lecture 1, but it's really good to just teach it out. And if anyone, aka me, decides to come back and look at this video, I really hope I did a decent job explaining about it. But that's basically understanding the foundations of the gait cycle.